From CBS 47 and Fox 30, you're watching This Week in the 904.
Welcome to This Week in the 904. I'm your host, Jake Stofan. This is a community affairs show, and it'll focus on politics, public policy, and the issues that affect our local communities. Joining us today is State Representative Wyman Duggan. You're a Jacksonville native. You've been serving in the Florida House since 2018. Thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me, and congratulations.
Oh yeah, thank you. This will be episode 2, so
Great.
We're still a little green, but hopefully this will go over pretty easy. So Representative Duggan, you're termed out. This is your last year in the Florida House. How is that going to impact kind of the way you approach this session?
Well, really not at all, in the sense that I have approached every session with the same mindset, which is doing the best job possible for the state of Florida and for Northeast Florida and for Jacksonville and for my district. It's a tremendous honor and opportunity to be one of 180,000 people in your district, to get to represent our great community, and to do the hard work of good policy making, good resource allocation, and most importantly, the part I've enjoyed day in and day out for the whole time is the constituent service. When people reach out to me and to our office, they are almost always in a moment of need. They are almost always entitled to some response from government that they are not getting in some fashion. And it shouldn't work that way. Government should be responsive, but when I reach out, they have to be responsive to me. And so being able to help people in that regard is fantastic.
Well, this session you've got several bills, some with local ties, also trying to bring home some money for your district. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about is this bill that seeks to tweak the statute of limitations when it comes to offenses against minors, not necessarily for that specific offense, but rather the reporting or the duty to report those offenses. How does it work right now, and how would it change under this bill?
Right, exactly. So there's what's known as a mandatory reporting obligation on the part of several professions that you would expect: teachers, social workers, doctors. If they have a good faith belief that there has been some abuse taking place, they have a mandatory obligation to report that to law enforcement, or, for example, in the education space, to the Department of Education, in addition to law enforcement. So that is the mandatory reporting obligation. There is a criminal penalty on the statute books for failing to make that mandatory report. There is as with all crimes, for the most part, a statute of limitations that is the period of time within which the crime of failing to report can be charged by law enforcement, state attorney.
Yeah.
So that's a 3-year window for that crime. Well, I'm sure your viewers are going to recall that we had several unfortunate incidences of abuse or alleged abuse out at Douglas Anderson School of the Arts. And in the prosecution by the state attorney of those offenses, it was discovered that some mandatory reporters, people who had an obligation to report that behavior, failed to do so. But unfortunately, the 3-year statute of limitations had expired. So it was the state attorney was unable to bring a charge against them. What my bill would do is that 3-year time clock wouldn't start until a law enforcement agency learns of the failure to report. So people who have an obligation to protect our children, like teachers, stand what's called in loco parentis, in the place of the parent. Mm-hmm. When you drop your child off at school, it's a reasonable expectation that they're going to look after your child in the same way that you would. And if they have an obligation to report and fail to do so, they should pay a penalty for that. And my bill helps make that reality.
And your bill basically says, instead of, when that offense against the minor happened, the clock starts ticking. The clock starts ticking once law enforcement becomes aware of it. So therefore, those teachers that maybe failed that student 5, 6, 7 years ago, when the student finally comes forward, makes that allegation, law enforcement starts looking into it, they have the opportunity to hold those that failed the child in that circumstance accountable still.
That's almost exactly right. I mean, currently the clock doesn't start when the offense happens. It starts when the mandatory reporter learns of it. But oftentimes that's close in time.
Yeah.
Now it would start when law enforcement learns that the mandatory reporter failed to report it.
Do you have any idea, I don't know if you have a specific number, I mean, how many people are we talking about that this statute of limitations had run out for in that Douglas Anderson situation? I mean, obviously there were several at the school, but.
Right, I don't know an exact number, but our state attorney, our great state attorney, Melissa Nelson, and I have a great working relationship. She brought this issue to me a couple of sessions ago, actually, when it first became apparent that people had, if you will, gotten away with not reporting. So I actually filed the same legislation last session. It didn't get any traction in the Senate, but this year it will, and so I feel very optimistic that we'll get to the finish line.
Well, we got a couple minutes before we got to go to break, but I did want to talk about one of the funding requests you have. It's for JSO's Real-Time Crime Center. I got to tour that facility last year at this point, because now it's 2026. For those who don't know about the Real-Time Crime Center, I mean, what do they do there? What is that operation all about?
Well, our Sheriff TK Waters has done such a tremendous transformative job in addressing crime in our city with fantastic results. And one of the tools, one of the reforms he has really put in place and elevated is the Real-Time Crime Intelligence Center. And it is, in a sense, what you might expect. It's almost like a rocket launch control center. It's a room with a big screen and lots of computer and camera feeds, and rows of people sitting at computer terminals, and all kinds of data is coming into that room. Video feeds, audio feeds, like the ShotSpotter technology. They, of course, have access to news and the internet, so they're aggregating all kinds of data into that space. And they use that to allocate resources around town, particularly on a more timely basis. So last session, which is earlier this year, the 2025 session, we're in 2026 now.
We're in
2026. Right. So last session, I was able to get an appropriation of funding to help augment that center. And this year, for the 2026 session, the sheriff has asked me to do that again for another tranche of funding for additional assets, hardware, infrastructure, and so I'm honored to do that for him.
Yeah, it's a really interesting operation they have going on there, kind of, like what you'd see in like a movie or something,
yes, exactly.
When they're trying to catch the terrorist or whatever it may be.
But it's working.
It is working. We've got to take a break, but don't go anywhere. Coming up, we'll hear from Representative Duggan on the hottest button issue of session. That's, of course, property tax reform, and why he sees this dialogue as a potential opportunity to rethink Florida's county structure.
From CBS 47 and Fox 30, you're watching This Week in the 904.
We're back on This Week in the 904 with Jacksonville State Representative Wyman Duggan. And Representative Duggan, obviously the hottest button issue this year is going to be property tax elimination or reform. What role are you going to be playing in that discussion? And at this point, do you have a favorite proposal?
So I'm honored to chair the Ways and Means Committee of the Florida House, which, as the name implies, has jurisdiction over the ways and means by which government is funded. That means basically tax revenue. Now, the legislation about local property taxes will be in the form of a proposed constitutional amendment. So we, the legislature, can't actually set or modify local property tax rates or means of taxation. What we can do is give the voters the option to vote directly on a change like that. So there are several pieces of legislation that are moving through the House, where I serve, and they will move through the committee that I chair, Ways and Means. One has already done so. That piece of legislation would put on the ballot a proposed constitutional amendment for the voters to vote on later this year, November of 26, on the general election ballot, to give themselves an additional $200,000 homestead exemption. It would only apply to homestead properties, not to non-homestead. It would hold harmless school funding, so it would apply only to the non-school portion of your tax bill. No school funding would be affected. It would also hold harmless first responder funding. Local governments would continue to be able to tax homestead property owners to achieve the same amount of revenue that they are yielding now, currently, for police and fire. But everything else would be subject to an additional $200,000 exemption on your home.
So you're kind of more in favor of kind of extending that exemption, making it bigger. Obviously, the governor wants to see just full out school, local revenue, property tax eliminated for homesteaded properties, basically your primary home. And obviously that's gotten a lot of concerns raised from Florida counties, especially those fiscally constrained counties, of which there are 29 of them, which is kind of surprising out of 67 counties in Florida.
Right.
His response to this, to address those concerns, is let's take hundreds of millions of dollars, put it in the state budget. State taxpayers, Duval taxpayers, would be funding Union County's budget, all the rest.
Right.
Which I think has arguments for and against, right? But
right.
when we were talking about this, you were saying, it really kind of exposes maybe we have too many counties in Florida.
Well, right. So just briefly, the governor hasn't come out with many specifics. Press accounts have indicated that he proposes to backfill local governments that are counties that are fiscally constrained. That has a definition in state statute of what that means. But yes, almost 29 out of 67, almost half fiscally constrained. If these counties were private entities, businesses that came to the state of Florida seeking some type of funding, grant funding, tax rebate funding, tax credit funding, anything, it's very unlikely we would fund them because they're, by definition, almost fiscally unsustainable. Yet because we have this county structure that has been built up since 1845, when we became a state, we have this antiquated, in my opinion, county structure that we've never really re-examined the assumptions for. We just kind of throw up our hands and say, well, we got to backfill, right? So that is, I think, the issue that has been surfaced, if you will, by this discussion.
And when you have a county, that means you have to fund a sheriff's department, you have to fund a county commission, a tax collector, all the different constitutional offices. Even though some of these counties, I was looking I think it's Liberty County, is the smallest county. It's got 8,000 people. That's like a big neighborhood.
That's exactly right. You are exactly right. Every county has 5 independent constitutional officers which have to be funded by the taxpayers of that county. They have to fund an independent school district because all of our school districts are, coterminous with a county. They have to fund a prison. They have to fund other first responders like fire. They have to fund all of the executive branch departments of a county like Public Works, Parks and Recs, Planning. It's an enormous overhead, if you will. And for counties, like you said, you would be shocked at how many counties in the state of the 67 have a total population of less than 25,000 people. It's quite a few.
The last question I have on this is, if you were to get some traction on that idea, let's maybe talk about consolidating some of these counties or
right.
putting them in with bigger ones. Is that just a legislative function? Is that something the legislature could decide to do, or what is sort of the process to making that happen? Well,
interestingly, the short answer is yes. The county boundaries of all the counties are actually in Florida statute. Pages and pages and pages of legal descriptions defining the county boundaries. All of that can be changed by legislation, unlike this property tax discussion where a constitutional amendment is required. Except that there are about 6 counties that are specifically mentioned in the Florida Constitution. And so if you wanted to change them, you probably would need a constitutional amendment. Other than that, the other 60, for the most part 60 plus, we as a legislature could just aggregate, combine, split, eliminate.
Well, I saw that Duval County kind of has almost lost it's in competition for its designation as the largest landmass county in the U.S., or landmass city, rather. So, if we pulled in a Union or a Baker or something, we could probably get that designation back officially.
Yeah.
We've got to take a break, but don't go anywhere. Coming up, we'll be talking with Representative Duggan about legislation he's filed to make Cecil Field a dominant force in the space industry.
From CBS 47 and Fox 30, you're watching This Week in the 904.
We're back on This Week in the 904 with State Representative Wyman Duggan. Representative at both the local and state level, we've been seeing Cecil Field come up in the headlines a lot. You're sponsoring 2 bills this session, one specifically dealing with Cecil, one addressing some things with Cecil. First of all, just help me kind of understand what these 2 pieces of legislation do.
So one is what's called a local bill. It applies within a defined geographic area rather than statewide. And that is a bill that came out of discussions led by our current council vice president, Nick Howland, and the city council, which passed a resolution in support, brought it to our legislative delegation, the Duval delegation. We endorsed it and supported it. So that bill would focus on the Jacksonville Aviation Authority, which is a creation of statute, and particularly with respect to Cecil Field, as you referenced, which is owned by the Jacksonville Aviation Authority. Once the Navy left town and closed Cecil, they conveyed it to the Aviation Authority, and they have a tremendous operation out there around commercial aerospace. But interestingly, it is also a commercial spaceport licensed for horizontal launch, not rockets taking off vertically from the ground, but horizontal launch activities. And there aren't very many spaceports around the country that are technically as far along as Cecil is in getting to a place where they could do commercial horizontal launch and recovery activity. And what the local bill would do is mandate that the Aviation Authority prioritize the economic development, the infrastructure, the planning of the commercial spaceport activities out at Cecil Field.
And then the other bill also addresses just spaceports writ large, right? It kind of gives them a little more autonomy, am I right?
That's exactly right. That bill has actually been filed by Representative Kim Kendall from Northern St. Johns County, a partner of mine in this effort. I am what's called the prime co-sponsor of that bill. So yes, that would give every spaceport in the state, not just Cecil, more local autonomy to operate, to plan, chiefly as it relates to what's called Space Florida, which is a statewide entity that's been housed in the Department of Commerce at the state level. They currently have quite a bit of oversight, and what the bill would do is kind of loosen that a little bit.
Gotcha. So, I mean, when we were talking about Cecil Field, you're very excited about what the potential is for that airfield, that spaceport. As you were mentioning, it would be horizontal launch, not vertical. So we're talking like space planes, but
Correct.
you know, it's more than just, you know, potentially developing that technology. It's all the other things that come along with it, that ability to take off horizontally, go up into orbit, land back down. You were talking about different things that they could do in medical research and
Sure.
all sorts of different things.
Sure. So an example would be Mayo Clinic could grow stem cells for their transplant operation, or grow pharmaceutical crystals in zero gravity in Earth orbit on a space plane type vehicle, and then bring it back to Cecil and then transport it immediately to Mayo, which is, you know, in the same county. So that's just an example of the type of biomedical opportunity as one example. The key factor, though, that excites me is, and I've always felt this way ever since I got elected, Cecil is such a rare asset in the entire state. It's got one of the longest runways in the state. So we need to capitalize on the assets that are already here in Duval County, and that is one that we can do. But if we take the lead in commercial aerospace activities in that regard, we have the opportunity to become another Silicon Valley. Because once we are able to go to market, if you will, the vendors will want to be here, and we can become a whole ecosystem built around that activity right here in Duval County.
Something unique that you don't necessarily see at Cape Canaveral or
Correct.
whatever, because that's all vertical for the most part.
And as importantly, it's almost completely at capacity. There's only so many windows of launch opportunity. There's only so much land and warehouse space around the Cape that users, vendors in this space can utilize. It's almost all gone. And that is what we have here. We have this tremendous asset. We have all of that land and capacity at Cecil Commerce Center, which is right next to Cecil Airfield. So I think all the pieces are in place to make it tremendously transformative for Duval.
So obviously these two bills are kind of like a small step towards that, right?
That's right.
I mean, how long-term of a vision is this in terms of seeing some of this stuff come to fruition?
Well, I mean, I think it's incumbent upon folks who are in the position of making policy to think long-term, to see around corners, again, but particularly leveraging off of assets that we already have. We don't need hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to create a spaceport. We already have the physical infrastructure. What we need to do is think about what are the pieces of policy we can put in place that will incentivize the market to come to Jacksonville. So in September of last year, I had a conversation with Secretary of Transportation Duffy, who is actually, you know, now oversees the FAA, oversees NASA, to ask him to expedite a reentry license for Cecil, which is also needed, and to leverage off of an executive order that the president signed. He committed to doing that. Then we had the government shutdown, right? So nothing happened for a period of time. But my hope is that they will pick that up, get that approved within a year, and then Cecil can be, sky's the limit, no pun intended.
Wow, yeah. And it sounds like, even though this may be your last session, Representative Kendall is also on this. So I would expect probably going forward we'll see her sort of pick up the torch, and maybe whoever ends up in your seat after the 2026 election will also put a focus on this to ensure that we get there.
Exactly.
Representative Duggan, thank you so much. And actually, your speaker pro tem, that was something that I didn't bring up. So if any of our viewers also like watching the Florida channel, you'll see a lot of Representative Duggan standing behind the
rostrum.
The rostrum, yes, not a podium. It's very specific language. Well, Representative Duggan, thanks again. I appreciate your time and these interesting discussions. Who knows? Maybe we'll see a much bigger Duval County one day. Well, thank you all at home for watching, and be sure to join us here next time for This Week in the 904, same time, same place.
Thanks for watching This Week in the 904.